Hi, my name is Paul Sargent. Welcome once again to AP Euro Bit by Bit, the series in which I'm trying to break down modern European history into small bite-sized pieces so that you can better understand it. Today, we answer one of the tougher questions that comes up on the AP exam that seems to be tested all the time, at least in the old format. It's, what was Lenin's new economic policy? So let's get started. Now, as with history, we always have to start with the causes of something, and this is no different because we have to understand the situation that forced a new economic policy in order to understand what it was and why it happened and what its results were. So let's start with the causes. Now, the number one cause of the establishment of the new economic policy was the thing called war communism. Okay, so let's go back into Russian history. The revolution of 1917 had put the Bolsheviks in power with Lenin at the top of the entire system. And they started to fight a civil war within Russia to try and take over the entire country. Now, they established a separate peace with Germany, pulled themselves out of World War I, and thus concentrate on fighting this civil war. It's the Reds, the Bolsheviks, against the Whites, pretty much everyone who didn't like the Bolsheviks. And the Bolsheviks had to come up with solutions which were pretty drastic in order to try and win the Civil War. What they adopted was a system known as war communism. Now, this was really the very first national attempt at a socialist or communist state. They nationalized industries, all factories, all major big industries. In fact, any business that employed more than 10 people was nationalized and brought under the control of the government. And the Communist Party started to requisition all kinds of supplies, including crops and things like that, food really, and push that towards the troops that were fighting in the Civil War. Now, if this sounds at all familiar to you, it's very reminiscent of exactly what happened and exactly why the Romanov dynasty fell during World War I. They were taking food from the people, sending it to the troops fighting World War I, and the people were starving. Well, guess what? War communism kind of worked the same way because the government had to set quotas for all kinds of different things to be produced. And they tried to take all of that food and then give it to the troops that were fighting the Civil War. Well, what resulted was kind of counterintuitive. There was real discontent among the farmers and the peasants, and many of them took to actually burning their own crops and killing their own livestock in order to lower the amount of food that was available, but thus plunging themselves into starvation and famine. It makes sense from a political protest standpoint, but from an individual standpoint, it seems as if you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. Anyway, under this war communism, production fell to below its pre-World War I numbers. In fact, Leon Trotsky, who was sort of the real Marxist ideologue of the Communist Party, that Russia was on the verge of economic collapse. This was the worst thing that could happen. So Lenin decided to come up with a solution. So Lenin's solution became known as the new economic policy. And the new economic policy really kind of went against the whole idea of communism. It reintroduced the idea of capitalism and private ownership of enterprise back into the system. Now, not completely. The government kept control of the major industries, okay? Transportation and infrastructure and all of that was under the control of the central government. And in fact, many of the large industries were kept under the control of the central government as well. But peasants in the countryside were allowed to farm and sell their own food. Factories were allowed to produce and sell on a somewhat open market their own products. This doesn't sound like the communism that Marx had talked about, and it doesn't sound like any sort of a communist economy at all. It sounds a lot like capitalism. Now, of course, why did Lenin make these concessions? Well, he was facing famine in the countryside. He was facing military revolts because the soldiers weren't getting the food because the peasants were burning it. He was facing really the collapse of his Bolshevik communist experiment. And so he decided to really take what he called a necessary step backwards. And that's this economic policy. The results were that it actually worked. Production increased, prices started to stabilize, food started being produced, things started working. And from 1921 until 1928, the new economic policy ran Russia. Now, 1928 is kind of an interesting year because after Lenin's death, it's around 1928 when Joseph Stalin is able to gain control of the Communist Party. By 1927, he's taken it away from Leon Trotsky, his real big competitor, kicked Trotsky out of the country, and sent him off into exile. He'll eventually end up in Mexico in a relationship with an artist by the name of Frida Kahlo. You may or may not know about her. And he'll eventually, in 1940, end up dead with an ice pick to the back of the head. Pretty gruesome. That's how they do things. But anyway, I'm digressing. And in this case, I guess I'm stalling a little bit. But the real results here are increased production. Workers get shorter hours and better wages. You actually have a change in the system for the better. In fact, the central government even starts to relax its secret police, the Cheka. It starts to relax censorship. It starts to give more freedom to the people, at least temporarily. Because I'm going to tell you what, the 1930s in Russia, yeah, not really a pleasant time for most people. So it's temporary. So just to kind of finish the story and maybe foreshadow an upcoming bit by bit, the new economic policy ended in 1928 with the introduction of Stalin's first of a series of 5-year plans. So that's the new economic policy. It's a move back away from communism, an introduction of some capitalism into a communist system, and real economic recovery as a result of that. But it won't last. The communists are gonna change this thing back. But for our purposes, that's my explanation to you of Lenin's new economic policy. So I hope that helps. I hope you understand it now, and I hope that this series is really helping you prepare for your exam or just to learn a little bit about history. So spread the word, shout it from the rooftops, share it with your friends. Come on, people. Let's get more people in on the learning. All right? So anyway, until next time, my name's Paul Sargent. This is AP Euro Bit by Bit. Thanks for watching.